Hey boys and girls, today we're going to talk about drug trafficking laws in Singapore. As most of you know, Singapore has one of the harshest drug laws in the world, primarily because the legislation, the law relating to drugs, which is the Misuse of Drugs Act, imposes several presumptions as to possession, drug possession, and trafficking. So, in most countries, the prosecution have to prove that you intend to possess the drug, and you intend to traffic the drug. But in Singapore and Malaysia, they flip the thing around. So the person who is accused of drug possession or trafficking has to prove that he did not possess or did not traffic the drug. That's why it's one of the harshest drug laws in the world. Not to mention also that the punishment in Singapore for drug trafficking can include caning, which is essentially whipping, and hanging, which is the death sentence. Now, Section 2 of the Misuse of Drugs Act defines traffic as to sell, to give, to administer, to transport, to send, to deliver, or to distribute, or to offer to do any of the foregoing. So, since trafficking is defined as to include giving, if you give your friend a puff of meth or ice, okay, and you don't take any money from him, it is still considered drug trafficking. Or if you give an ecstasy pill to a friend, okay, and you don't collect any money for him, you give it to him out of friendship, it is still considered trafficking, and you can be jailed for 5 years and get 5 strokes of the cane for drug trafficking. And if you administer a drug, for example, there's this practice called slamming, which is injecting methamphetamine. So even if the meth is not yours, but you help a friend administer the drug to inject into his veins, you are still deemed to be drug trafficking. So, Section 17 of the Misuse of Drugs Act contains several presumptions. Okay, if you meet these criteria, you are presumed to be trafficking the drug. So, if you possess more than 3 grams of morphine, more than 2 grams of heroin, more than 15 grams of marijuana, more than 3 grams of cocaine, more than 25 grams of methamphetamine, or more than 113 grams of ketamine, you are presumed to have the drug in possession for the purpose of trafficking, unless it is you can prove that your possession of the drug was not for the purpose of trafficking. So as I mentioned earlier, in most countries, the prosecution has to prove that you intended to traffic. But in Singapore, as long as you possess the requisite quantity of the drug, you are presumed to be trafficking. So it is your burden, you, the accused, has to prove that you did not intend to traffic the drug. So there are 3 classes of drugs set out in the schedule of the Misuse of Drugs Act. Okay, and the sentence, the minimum mandatory sentence for trafficking depends on the class of drugs. So for drugs such as ecstasy and ketamine, if you are convicted of trafficking, there is a minimum mandatory sentence of 5 years and 5 strokes of the cane. For drugs such as heroin, cocaine, marijuana, weed, ice, also known as methamphetamine, the minimum mandatory penalty is 20 years and 15 strokes of the cane. So the courts regard trafficking and importation of drugs as offences of utmost gravity. Therefore, the sentences are the harshest, okay? And I will discuss the factors that will affect the sentence for trafficking drugs. First factor, quantity. The higher the quantity, the higher the sentence. Number 2, the type of drug. In Singapore, heroin is considered the most pernicious, the most evil type of drug. So if you possess more than 15 grams of heroin, you're presumed to be trafficking in heroin and you will get the death penalty, so you'll be hanged. Number 3, the duration and sophistication in planning and carrying out the offense. If there's a lot of planning, if it's very sophisticated, you hide the drugs in some concealed compartment, you use drones, okay, the sentence will be harsher. Number 4, the relative level of participation in relation to the accomplices. If you play a small role, okay, compared with the person who does all the arrangements and the delivery, then you're less likely to get higher sentence. Whereas the person who the mastermind who arranges all the drug delivery and whatever will get a higher sentence. 5th consideration, whether the offender is an addict himself. If a drug addict sells small quantities of drugs to pay for his addiction, the court will make allowance for his addiction, the fact that he has to sell drugs because he has to pay for his addictions. Okay, so the court will be more lenient, especially if he has no prior convictions. Now, good character is of very little value in drug trafficking cases, because even if you are a good person, you have a good character, you have a degree, you have a master's, you have a PhD, you have done a lot of volunteer work, it matters very little, okay? Because even a national champion was hanged before. You can Google on your Google. His name is Shamugan Murugeso. So despite being a national champion in some sport, he was hanged for trafficking marijuana, weed essentially. But even though good character is of little value, a bad record, especially of previous drug offences, will lead to a higher sentence. This was laid down in the Singapore case of Loh Kok Wah and public prosecutor. So thanks for watching this introductory video on drug trafficking. Stay tuned for the case commentaries.